Hi guys, welcome back to Just Talking, where I talk at you and you sometimes listen. Today we're doing the history of the Blackpool Pleasure Beach ghost train. I have done 2 other videos on Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and I thought, how about I share my knowledge of the history of some of the rides at the park. I have some of my information from the video that Pleasure Beach Experience did, Joyland Books, and also the Wikipedia page about the ride, but some of the knowledge I have learnt from staff members at the park and, just general knowledge that is showcased around the area. So, let's get into it. So, it first opened in around 1930 when the pretzel model of ride was popular in America, and the pretzel ride is showcased here. This is an American version of it, and it's basically a single track ride that focuses on mainly 2-seater cars and can either operate with one car going around at a time or multiple connected. And originally in 1930 when it opened, it was just called the pretzel ride. There's no real specific detail on how it was themed, but it was in 1931 dubbed the Ghost Train after the Arnold Ridley popular play The Ghost Train, which was written in 1923. And it was really renamed this because they wanted something that would connect with a British audience, because the pretzel ride and name wasn't very well known in the UK. It was only really in America that was a big thing. And it was located near the lot that the Wild Mouse would be later built on in the 60s sort of time. And it had no real exterior theming or true interior theming, and there's no real record of how it was, and it would only have one level of track, so there was none of the 2-story element that we see today. It has undergone a few refurbishments in its time, and one of these is in 1936 by Joseph Emberton, whose designs have inspired many different rides over the ages, but he did partially design the new sort of current Grand National Station, which is a Mobius loop coaster. That is also a wooden coaster and appears to be dueling as well, and that was opened, around the 1920s. And he enlarged the ride to be a double-deck ride, and that also introduced the small drop in the centre of the ride's facade, and that still remains today. And he wanted a more Art Deco style, and he was very much a part of the modernisation of the Pleasure Beach. Because, all of the rides were basically pop culture from the 1920s and 1910s, and he wanted it to be very current. And in the 1930s, there was all this Art Deco modern style, and he wanted to follow that and include that top element and make it bigger for more theming. But there was no real outside exterior theming as there is today, but there was supposedly some. The second refurbishment was made by Jack Ratcliffe, who was tasked with moving it up slightly because the Wild Mouse was intended to be built on the lot. So it probably would have been about here by these little gazebo type stands. And it was slightly themed after both of these refurbishments, but not to the standard it was today. I'll discuss that refurbishment in a minute. And this Wild Mouse right here would later be put into standing but not operating near to the end of the 2017 season of the park, and would be disassembled in the following year, I believe, in the off-season of 2017 and throughout 2018. Now it's just an empty lot with some sort of artificial grass, and it's sometimes fenced off, but that will make way for any future projects. So they just had to move it up for that construction, but now there's something else that will possibly be there instead. So the third and fourth refurbishment took place between 1970 and now. In 1973 they began adding the castle facade that they have today, as well as some of the things on top, such as the iconic ghost train figure there. And they added the giant skeleton which emerges from the tower, and there is a picture on that on, I believe, the next slide. And the skeleton has been there since 1973, and it's had a few licks of paint through the ages, but it remains the same as it was when it opened. In 1990 and 2000, a giant bat was placed above the queue line when it had shelters and also more railing on it. That was later removed in 2008. And some of the more relevant characters, such as the Slimer, were added to the roof of the station. Sadly, this effect no longer works. It used to go back and forth from the roof, and there was also some pumpkins as well. Some of the facade features have come into disrepair, but there are hopes that they will be refurbished with, them keeping up to date with changing the different scenes. In 2008, Trauma Towers closed at the end of the season, which was a walk-through horror attraction which included a small ride at the end that I can't exactly remember like how it truly went, but it did used to be a separate ride until they included it in the Trauma Towers attraction. And some of the scenes were added in there because it did include some animatronic effects. And this includes the Phantom of the Opera scene, which can be seen in the lower end section of the ride, which is about here. And that features popular scenes from things such as The Exorcist, Dracula, and it does feature the iconic cycling skeletons, which really that did come from Trauma Towers originally. Based on what people have said. But there has been updates since with some of the items and special effects from the Vampire Beach Nights, which is the original like horror nights that they did, where they would have walkthrough sort of characters such as a werewolf and this crooked old man and various other sort of zombie themed characters, and they would have decorations. They still do them now, but now they have the Journey to Hell Freak Nights, and they did add Grim Reaper Archway. They added the zombie contamination box in replacement for the old Dracula that used to beckon you into the ride, and they have also added some other effects such as another contamination box where you see someone banging on a window. And I'm assuming that they will, when they get back to doing horror nights and all that theming, they'll continue to add to it, but they do manage to still maintain the original charm and lack of sort of real scares in it, as it originally was. Furthermore, they did change the luminescent skeleton head that used to fall down and approach you with a zombie head instead. And they've been doing some regular updates and licks of paint since, but they do still have the luminescent figures that are lit up by black lights, so it does still have a lot of classic effects that will be from the 70s and 2000s. There are some bits of lore for the ride as well. So the ghost train is dubbed the most haunted in the world by Blackpool and was given a visit by a popular British ghost hunting show, Most Haunted, which has toured around the country and been to places like Mary King's Close in Edinburgh. And they basically tried to contact this ghost who is called Cloggy, and it was an employee who really has an unknown name. There's been speculation as to what it really was, but no one really knows if it's the truth or if it was a PR stunt and that was made to bring more guests to the ghost train, being quite, quite an old ride. It hit like 90 last year, so it needs to generate some buzz every now and again. But supposedly he was caught in the mechanical clogs of the machine that would keep the ride going and passed away after being basically disemboweled. But that was where he got his name, Cloggy, and there is a section of the ride where there are luminescent clogs with arms and legs sticking out of them, and that supposedly references the employee. And many have stated that during the werewolf section of the ride, after you go through the first outdoor turn, they can feel someone like punching or grabbing their arm during that section of the ride before you enter the small drop in the centre. And the ride also features music from Tangerine Dream, and that is called Impressions of the Sorcerer, and they removed some of the more notable parts of the soundtrack so it wouldn't exactly be too under copyright fire, and so they could keep using it, and that was made for the film Sorcerer, and you can hear that playing throughout the ride and sometimes in the queue line. But there is also an original soundtrack piece which basically tells the guests that there isn't anything to be afraid of apart from ghosts and ghouls and unholy spectres and things, and basically tries to convince the guests to go in. and that soundtrack has been there for, I suppose, a few decades at this point. There's no real record of who recorded the voicing for that and when it was originally released, because a lot of the rides have quite a blurred history. But that's really all you can find based on the Ghost Train at the Pleasure Beach, because, you know, there's not too much recordings of some parts of the history. But if you do enjoy these sorts of history videos where I do try my best to explain everything I know about the ride and everything else to do with it, then you can recommend a ride, and I will definitely do some research into it, put in a similar format so you can just read through it pretty quickly and do some explaining on top of it. I do really like this ride. I think it's a great one to go on for kids, adults, everyone. And I would say if you have any recommendations for histories of rides, no matter how old they are, I'll definitely go look into it. And yeah, I won't be doing a video on Sunday or Monday probably, because I'll be doing a Red Dead video on Tuesday, and I'll just see where everything happens and what videos I get asked to make. So yeah, leave a like if you enjoyed, leave a comment for suggestions, maybe drop a sub if you like this sort of videos. And yeah, this was just talking. Bye bye.